Great, and I'm live. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining me again. This is a quick post in which I'd like to share two lessons which have screamed large at me from what everybody's calling the awakening. But first, let me ask that as this is going out on Instagram and it's going out on my Rumble platform called Renaissance TV, please comment, share, subscribe to that channel so that I'm able to bring you more content. Okay, so let's get to this really quickly. First of all, what are the two lessons of this awakening? For me, they're very clear. The first one is that we're going nowhere without honesty. Should be self-evident, but actually has been completely counter to the narrative over particularly the last 2 years, though arguably we've had a dishonest narrative for hundreds of years. Secondly, that we're going nowhere without love and compassion. That's difficult, isn't it? Because love and compassion are two of the least macho characteristics we have all been raised to think about, especially coming out of the mouth of a man. But I'm telling you the lessons as I'm learning them, and they are very real. I'm not making them up. First thing is, when a person like me is talking about these things, it's lent credibility by the fact that I'm an ordinary guy. I am no religious guru. I am no great religious thinker. I'm a person who has always lived in the mainstream of society, and even being considered in the early days of my life a conservative, right of centre, kind of a scion, an icon of what the establishment would like a person like me, a black person like me, to be. So when I'm saying what I'm saying, if it's counter to that identification that I had before, what I suggest to you is that you can take it to the bank, because this isn't how I was raised to be. Now, the first lesson, one of honesty. It's everything that we have been living, particularly in the last 2 years, but arguably for decades before, has been about denialism. In the West, people have denied that they have absolutely zero respect for Africa. In Africa, people have been in denial about the fact that they somehow feel belittled and inferior to Europe. And the whole edifice is held together by a process of dishonesty, which has a nicer name, which we can call denial. So the only reason we can live with the lies that we have been telling each other is by living in denial. Otherwise, we cannot continue to tell those lies, to hold those false truths, and think well of ourselves. Secondly, everything, as has been shown clearly through this pandemic, has been an inversion of the truth. Take, for example, I'll just one example will tell the story. It's about medicine. I always was raised to look up to, trust with my life, and revere the medical profession. Many of my friends at university were med students. I've got to say, they worked harder than most of us. They seemed to be constantly being tested month after month after month, while we waited for long periods before we did exams. But these guys were under pressure all the time. So when, after about 6 years or so of this kind of training, they come out as medicuses, you can't help but doff your lid and show them a bit of respect. And you imagine that what they're telling you is the gospel truth. Actually, it's not. It hasn't been. And it is the pandemic that we have lived through, the fake pandemic that we have lived through, that has made this very evident. Medicine has never been, in recent times, though it would have been in ancient times, about healing anybody. Medicine has been about making people money through the prescription of pharmaceutical drugs. And if it meant that you became, what should we say, an addict or whatever of the medication that you were given, if it happened that you were damaged in any way by the medication that you were given, French would say tant pis, too bad in English. That's what it means. So, and yet at the same time, we've had this thing of kind of elevating medical science to a certain standard of almost godlike status. But it was when the pandemic struck, it was when very well qualified, world-class medical scientists started to spin an alternative narrative to what Big Pharma, the World Health Organization and other institutions were spinning out, that we discovered that, oh, I see, there has all this while been an invisible hand behind the scenes running the activities, and so therefore controlling most of the people with medical qualifications. Now, of course, it's a huge ask to ask a person to put their livelihood, for which they have, I can attest to this, they have slaved to acquire. Now, who am I to ask them to follow their Hippocratic oath and say first do no harm, and speak out against authorities who are palpably doing things which are contrary to the welfare of humanity? So that's a question of inversion. That's another dishonesty that we have been living through. So the other lie that we have been living through is that of division. Owing to the activities of the media, the world has been shown as entirely divided between power blocks, political philosophies, geopolitical centers of interest, and so forth. Whereas in actual fact, the world isn't like that at all. So people in Europe feel perfectly enabled when they see the logo. Let me get that right. Yes, it's over my top left shoulder, at the top there. Moment they see the shape of Africa, I would say 8 out of 10 Caucasians switch off and just move on and say, nah, this is not for me. Forgetting the fact that 1.3 billion of our fellows come from that orange continent behind my shoulder in 53, 54 countries. And that together, their nations produce the natural resources which keep the livelihood, the welfare, and the wealth of Europe in place. But they'll scoot past it because, well, it's not part of their world, a world in which they are a minority, but have been taught very successfully through media activities, through cultural developments, through cultural norms, and so on, to feel superior above the rest of the world in which they live. Okay? Now, we have the realization, apart from that inverted truth, comes the realization that actually Europe, the Americas, Africa, Australia, and the other Antipodeans, the Far East, the Middle East, China, Russia, the Pacific region, all of these are a little bit like, best way to describe it in my book as I'm learning now, is that they're like the different facets of a cut gem. None of those facets on their own are the gem itself, but together, each of them reflect, refract, and bend the light when it falls on the gem to give it its luster, its glow, its beauty, its real essence. So the dishonesty that people routinely live by shutting their eyes to other facets of this magnificent gem causes a lot of difficulty. Now, this brings to mind the second great learning. The first learning was about the dishonesty, the inversion, the kind of division of the world so that it can be ruled and so on. All of these things are false paradigms. Next thing is, it seems to me, after observing what we've been through, particularly over the past 2 years, is that nothing is going to happen without love and compassion. Because actually, love and compassion is the very opposite of the dishonesty which has enabled cruelty of a degree which actually genus Homo sapiens has never known, starting with the slave trade, going on into the First World War, going on into the Second World War, during which there was the Jewish Holocaust, then the Belgian genocide in the Congo. Something happened in Rwanda as well, of a lesser order, but a genocide is a genocide. Before that, the Europeans went to North America, wiped out whole swathes of the native population. And was it before or up now? Before that, they went to Australia and wiped out the native Australian people. Now, the only way we have been able to live with ourselves on this is to pretend it's not happening. A. B. Not to teach it in schools. And C. To tell ourselves, oh, well, I personally wasn't responsible for any of that. So because I have never caused a genocide in my pretty, lovely, decent life, I'm completely free. But my brother, my dear sister, if you're of European origin, you're carrying the loot in your pocket because your ancestors did all of that to make you wealthy. So if you remain silent and ignorant, as Mark Passio so beautifully puts it, you remain silent and ignorant of this fact, you are actually aiding, condoning, and abetting horrific crimes that have taken place and low-key continue to take place today. So the overwhelming second lesson I'm getting from this is that no matter what has happened to my people, I mean, I'm from Ghana, all right? Ghanaians were enslaved. A lot of West African people were enslaved. And the funny thing about, if you don't come from there, you won't understand. But you don't have to go to any other West African country. There is a natural sense of kinship. Somebody says, I'm from Cameroon. You treat them like a cousin. You know, I'm from Senegal. Whoa, you know, it's like a cousin. For Ghana, Nigerians are like brothers and sisters. My children are part Nigerian. So we're all very much kind of molded together. And it brings home another truth that actually there is only one world. There isn't Europe, Africa, the Americas, the Middle East, the Far East, Israel, South Africa, China, and so on. There's only one world. And that is the truth of this great awakening, which has been caused by so many of us being so tortured that we had to give our heads a shake, rub our eyes, and work out what reality was really like. Even people like myself, who were Mr. and Mrs. or Mr. and Mrs. Typical, or Mr. and Mrs. Straight, or Mr. and Mrs. Establishment, even us, we have had to wake up. Now it's up to the rest of us. You know, you can choose to wake up, you can choose to remain asleep, but you are not awakening and going forward with life unless, one, you become honest, and two, you understand that love and compassion, that the other is you and you are the other. These are eternal and abiding perceptions which, going forward, none of us can live without. Thank you so much for listening. And once again, do subscribe to my channel if you've watched it this far. Talk to you soon.